African American folk tales, maybe indigenous Mexican mythology, also legends from Guam. And then being indigenous to someplace else, it gives me a greater appreciation for people who are indigenous from here. I really want to know, like, how does this work? Like, how are we learning how to read? You know, I can't just be happy with buying, oh, everybody said to use this curriculum. Just feeling like what's happening out in the world now, putting the political stuff aside, AI is coming, universities are not being funded. It's just, wait, what am I doing for homeschooling? We're going to look at the child in front of us, in the world around us, and try to give the education that they need for who they are and where they live now. There's 5 symbols on that wampum for the Confederacy, and that's for the Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk.
This week we're meeting Tomika. Tomika is a homeschool mom of 3, currently living in Western New York. As a trained chemist, she brings her curiosity and love for science to her home education practice. In the early years, her homeschooling style was Waldorf-inspired, making use of art, hands-on learning, and living books, all while incorporating her family's multicultural background and desire to know more about the diverse world around them. Now, in the 11th year of homeschooling, she would describe her current style as eclectic and uses various curriculum, resources, and the local community to meet the educational needs of her 5th, 8th, and 11th grade children. This is a homeschool journey. Hi, Tomika. Welcome.
Hello.
I'm glad you're here. So what I like to start out with, because there's so much variation what the requirements are from state to state, I would like for you to tell us what state you're in and requirements for that.
I am in New York State. The requirements for New York State is that when your child is 6, you need to let your local school district know that you're homeschooling. And so you send them in every single year something that's called a letter of intent. And that is basically just saying, hi, we're going to homeschool. And after that, you need to send into your school district an individualized homeschool instruction plan, which is basically saying these are the subjects that we're doing, and you can use a list of resources, some topics that you're covering, and you could say that it's subject to change. It's a very small list of things that are required for your homeschool time. So it's usually like you need to have some English, language arts, math, social sciences, social studies, science, as you get through the grades, library, skills. But they have a list of everything that you need for your child to cover from K through 12. Then every quarter, you need to send a quarterly report to say, this is what we've covered. They've had this number hours of instruction. You could just say, oh, we've met the minimum hours of instruction. Like you don't have to be super detailed about it. Then at the end of the year, you send a final assessment. For elementary grades, it can be a written narrative. Just says, oh, my student's doing great. They really enjoyed this year. They learned whatever they learned this year. Just something to say, okay, we did homeschool. It went well. And then for middle school, they need to be tested every other year using a standardized test. I think most people use the California Achievement Test here where I am. And then once they hit high school, they need to be tested every single year at the end of the year. When you're finished with homeschooling, if you've met all the requirements, you let your school district know we're done. Can we get what's called a letter of equivalency? And it is up to the school district of whether or not they will give you a letter of equivalency.
Oh my gosh. Are you allowed to give your student diploma?
I mean, I guess you could give them a diploma. I don't know who would count it though.
In my experience, when you start looking at colleges, if that's where you're bound, they don't have the same assessment as far as graduation for homeschoolers that they do for public school kids that have diploma. Right. New York seems to me to have the most complex and highest accountability of education. Do you know anybody, maybe California, that has?
I feel like Pennsylvania, they have to do like really meet with somebody and portfolios.
I don't know. Florida does.
You guys do portfolios?
Right. We send our letter of intent like you do, and then you have a couple different options to send in to the county to say we've met the requirements for homeschooling each year. One of them is to keep a portfolio and have an annual evaluation. And the other is to do standardized testing and send those results in. And then there are loopholes that people use. You can also enroll in an umbrella school, which only takes attendance. And if you're enrolled in an umbrella school, you're considered enrolled in a private school, and the same standards aren't upheld if you are registered with the county as a homeschooler. But we registered with the county as a homeschooler and do an annual evaluation. And I really enjoy the annual evaluations for both my kids and myself. Evaluators are such a wealth of information. And I gain so much from that. And then also it gives my children the opportunity to go through their work for the year and see how much they've accomplished and share with someone else the things that they are most proud of.
Right. You know, I know that on paper, it sounds like we have the most accountability. I feel like we have the most busy work. Really, when it comes, because the school district can't say that what you've done is not enough. Or if you say we've done this number of hours and we've met we've met at least 80% of what we wanted to do, like 80% of what you wanted to do could be almost nothing. You know what I mean? Right. So you can tell them like these are all, you can write out the list of all the topics that you covered. And even if the topics that you covered are not equivalent to what they'd be covered in like a public school, for instance, they really cannot come back. And as long as your test scores are looking good, they're not going to come back and say like, oh, well, I see for like algebra, you never got to, I don't know,
factoring quadratic formulas.
So, I think so. Here you can be put on probation. Probation is if you're not turning in your paperwork, and if when your students are testing, they're showing no improvement.
Oh, that's interesting.
Or they test at below the 33rd percentile for their grade level. When you're on probation, if you take the next test and they show improvement, even if it is still not amazing, they're like, okay, well, you showed improvement, so move along. So I would say like it does look like we have a lot of accountability here, but there definitely are ways that people get around what's required.
When we first talked about New York's standards versus Florida standards, I was saying how intimidating and exhausting it is to have to do quarterly reports. And you were like, once you get into it, it's not that hard.
It's not that hard. I still don't like doing them. I still am kind of like, ugh, like I have to just tell them like, I'm doing it. Just trust me. I think most beginning homeschoolers, they want to impress the school districts, and they're like, oh, we've done all of these topics and we went on all these field trips and my kids are in all these like extracurricular classes. And then when you start looking at what like older homeschoolers are putting on their quarterly reports, and it's just the headings of chapters in the books, just a couple of things. And it's just like, oh, okay, I don't actually have to be doing, they're not really looking at it like really in depth like that, which I'm not saying that you should be trying to not give your child an education. Do you know what I mean? But it's,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't think anybody within our circles is
Right.
interested in educational neglect. How did your family find themselves homeschooling?
Well, I would say like the seed for me was planted before my daughter was even born. My oldest, who is 17, when I was pregnant with her, I was taking a prenatal yoga class. And there is this little 13-year-old girl who used to come to the yoga class. She was not pregnant. She was just attending because she was shadowing our yoga instructor. I started talking to her, and she was part of this homeschool program where they connected students to professionals in areas that they were interested in going into careers. She was shadowing a prenatal yoga instructor, a pediatrician, and like a Montessori childcare place. And so I just started talking to her. I was like, oh, that is so cool that like you get to do this when you're 13, that you actually get to be out in the world and seeing how things work. I think that first planted the seed. After my daughter was born, through the attachment parenting groups, I met a lot of homeschoolers and their kids. And I was like, oh, this is not so out there. And I love learning. And I just thought it would be really fun to be there and part of that process as my kids were learning.
That's one of the reasons that I did it too. I taught preschool in college thinking that I would never go back to education, and I really enjoyed my work in the preschoolers. It was a wonderfully educationally progressive preschooler, so there was lots of training that they gave to us, which was awesome. But when my child was born, we also had been exposed to other homeschoolers. That time came where it was ready to send him to school. I was like, wait, I want to be the one that teaches him how to read, and I want to be the one that spends my day with him, and I want to be the one that sees those aha moments in his education. And yeah, that's why we
Where I was living at the time, the homeschoolers, they were open to having the younger kids come and do things. They had the info on all the little fun places to go and the museums and things like that. And I could send my kid to school, or we could like keep learning at home, going on these field trips and learning in a fun way. And my daughter was also like pretty sensitive and shy. And so I think at the beginning too, it just seemed like she would have needed an extra year anyway. And then once we got into it, we just never stopped.
Same. What did you do before homeschooling, and how has that influenced your homeschooling?
I had my daughter not too far out of finishing graduate school. I went to graduate school for chemistry. After I graduated with my master's, I stayed on with my PI. She was starting a biotech company. And so I was her director of R&D for a little while. We were making like slides for looking at the interaction of drugs with receptors inside of a phospholipid bilayer.
Let's pause. Because I understand what you're saying. I don't know if everybody understands. So you were making special slides that would hold a fatty layer of membrane so that you could see the chemical interactions that were happening on that slide.
Right, at that membrane. If we go back to like high school biology, we learned that like if you have your cell, things will come to the cell membrane and they might interact with protein there. It's like the key in the lock. The molecule might hit this protein, the protein will change, and then inside the cell, it'll start off a cascade of whatever. Scientists, they want to look at how exactly are things drugs, like how are they interacting with those proteins at the surface. When you have a microscope slide and you have like the cell, like a membrane of a cell or something that is like an artificial membrane of a cell, it's hard to like see everything that's going on because there's just like so much floating around. But we figured out that if we took a silica glass slide and if we put some like little teeny itty bitty spheres, nano-sized silica spheres on top of it, it creates a porous slide almost. You can suspend this layer on top of this porous substrate and put a drug that has a dye on it and let it go and interact with the proteins in that fatty, the phospholipid bilayer. You can start to study like what's actually going on here. The idea was that we'd make these slides and sell them to companies that are doing these type of studies. Yes. So that's what I did. And then my husband was also in graduate school and he finished his PhD. It was time for him to go do his postdoc.
And he's also in chemistry.
And he's also a chemist also. He's actually a physicist who ended up going to graduate school for chemistry. So he's now a chemist, a physical chemist. I was okay, I'm just going to go with you. I'll find another job. This happened to be in 2008. When there weren't a lot of jobs or
the Great Recession?
The Great Recession. So I was like, I'm not finding a job. We're going to have our one kid. We're just going to have the one kid. And I wanted to stay home with the kid anyway for a little bit. And then after that, at the next stop, it will just be 2 years for a postdoc. I'll go back to work. Kid will be ready to go to school. Good to go. We started on that plan and it ended up, I really liked staying home with my daughter, and that little seed of homeschooling was starting to sprout. And so then I just ended up not ever like.
And how does your background in chemistry affect your homeschooling?
Well, I would say at least for the sciences, of course, we're very comfortable in the sciences here. I would say more our whole family has just kind of like curiosity about life, how things work. It's kind of maybe got me in trouble a little bit with the homeschooling because I just am not happy with taking the curriculum just off the shelf. I really want to know, like, how does this work? Like, how are we learning how to read? I can't just be happy with buying, oh, everybody said to use this curriculum. I'm just going to get this one and go with it. I want to know what's the research behind like how we're learning certain subjects. Is that curriculum following that, or is it just something else? Is this just a fad,
Oh my gosh, Tomika, that is just like me. In my membership subscription, the first post that is available is all the tools for learning and learning how we learn. This is how we learn, and it's things like spacing, interleaving, memory recall, making connections, dual coding.
Right.
And that governs any kind of resource or curricula that I'm using. Are they doing those things in their curricula? Because this is what the science says, tells us how we learn.
That really has affected my homeschooling. Also, I really wanted to research all the different philosophies out there. And it started also like when I was pregnant with my daughter. One of the moms who was also pregnant at the time, she owned the Montessori school, actually that the 13-year-old that I told you about was attending. She like pulled me aside. She's like, okay, if your kid ever goes to a Montessori school, here are the things to look for, because not all Montessori schools are the same. That kind of like first thing, oh wait, so what is Montessori? I started looking at like what Montessori was. And then I led to like Reggio Emilia. Then what is Waldorf? And then as I entered the homeschool space, Charlotte Mason and project-based learning and place-based learning. And so I could get into the weeds, definitely learning about all the different philosophies. But in the end, I really did land on Waldorf for the beginning. And although I have to say, because Waldorf was created in Germany.
Yes. I know the history. Yeah.
The history of Waldorf, it needed to be adapted.
Yes.
For me, for not only to be more modern, but also because my family is a multicultural family. I am Chamorro and Black. So Chamorro are the indigenous people of the island of Guam. So Pacific Islanders, which is a territory of the United States. So Chamorros are all American citizens, regardless of whether or not they get to vote for their president, but they are American citizens.
Similar to Puerto Rico.
Similar to Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, yes. So my mother and father, they met in California. They're both in the military. I also spent my childhood living in different states and countries. I definitely have a global perspective, I would say, on life in general.
In the military housing and communities, they are slightly different than what we see in our regular everyday communities, in that there's a greater number of diversity, there's a greater tolerance. Can you talk about that aspect?
The U.S. military, they tend to recruit people from lower income places, and they also go into minority schools and try to recruit people into the military. The result of that is the military is fairly diverse compared to the general population. So you find yourself living in different countries. You have to learn different languages. You do have to learn to be tolerant of other people, different ways of living. I would say I don't know if that's because of my parents, but most of the people that they were surrounded us with were of that mindset. And there are some people who they're in the military and they're stationed in Milan, near Milan, and they will never leave the base. There are those people, but I would say at least the people that my parents surrounded us with, they were interested in learning about the place where they lived. And also in school, we have a thing called host nations as part of our curriculum, as part of the DoD schools. I don't know if they still do it, but when I was younger, they did. While you're in the country, you learn about the history of the country that you're living in. You learn about the culture, you learn about the food, you take field trips, you're immersed in the culture. You're not just on a little American island in another country, at least as a child. They try to get you out and learning about where you are. As far as homeschool goes, that means that, for instance, for Waldorf, when all the other kids are doing Grimm's fairy tales for the alphabet, right? I'm trying to bring in African American folk tales, maybe indigenous Mexican mythology, also legends from Guam. Also, being indigenous to someplace else, it gives me a greater appreciation for people who are indigenous from here. I'm also going to bring in stories from the Haudenosaunee, which are the indigenous people that live here, the original peoples of Western New York.
And they're fascinating culture and history. Hugely. They were a huge impact. Franklin was fascinated by their confederacy, which if you have not heard of Haudenosaunee, it's because that's what they call themselves. Iroquois is what we are used to hearing, the Iroquois Confederacy, but they call themselves Haudenosaunee. And they have a wampum of the Great Peace. I found out that they bead their history. They don't formally write in the way we write, but this is a way of retaining the history.
Right. I mean, they do now, right? Formally,
well,
right?
Yes,
but,
yes.
But yeah, originally, and they still do make the wampum. If you go to the Smithsonian DC, they have some of the wampum on display. And here you can see in some of our museums locally in the area, they'll have wampum that are for different treaties. Yeah.
That's the one that I'm thinking of. They have a wampum that has, I think it's a square in the middle and trees on the outside, or I may have.
There's a tree. So the trees in the middle, there's 5 symbols on that wampum for the Confederacy, and that's for the Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk. I wouldn't believe it's the Onondaga. That's the middle. That's the great tree of peace. And so the idea is when they were at war with each other, the great peacemaker came and said, guys, we can't do this anymore. We need to have peace. Tadadaho, which was the warring leader, he had supposedly snakes in his hair, and the grandmother combed the snakes out of his hair. When he finally agreed to the peace, the people came together from those 5 nations and they buried their weapons under the great tree of peace. If you drive around here, you'll see in different places that image of the squares with the tree in the middle all over Western New York.
I just say how impressed I am that you remember that story in a way that you can just narrate it. That is so impressive. And you remembered all 5 nations. And just point of clarity, there's 6 or 7 nations now.
There's 6. Now there's the Tuscarora, because originally the Tuscarora, who are actually probably closer to where I live, at one point in time they moved down to Virginia, which I also lived in. And I think when I'm not sure, maybe it's when the colonists came, they were like, let's get out of here. And they came back up. And now the Tuscarora are folded back into the Confederacy.
I'm so impressed. Excellent. Yes, that's
I taught history a couple times.
Yeah, it's a nice review for me.
Right. That's our local history. So that I can teach. I can tell you about, but maybe the history of the indigenous people where you are.
That's the Muskogee.
The Muskogee, yeah. I don't
the Appalachee, the Creek, and the Cherokee.
Right. I don't have a deep knowledge of those.
Understandably. What did the progression of homeschooling look like for you? from when you started, when your oldest was little, and then you have 2 other children that you folded into the mix. What did it look like when they were little? How did it change, and what does it look like now?
As I said before, when my daughter was younger, I was really drawn to Waldorf. So she kind of seemed she was maybe not as ready to start first grade as I think I would have liked her to be. But I think maybe that was probably just natural. Some kids, they're really gung ho about starting school. And she was, no, I want to be out in the woods still and doing my crafts and things. And so Waldorf was a very nice way to gently fold her. And so we started doing the blocks, the storytelling. At the time when she was 5 or 6, when she was 6, her brothers were 3, and then I had a newborn. So
Oh, that's a lot at one time.
that was a lot at one time to be starting school, and it's hard to even remember that there was a lot going on. So I did try to stick with the blocks the best I could. I think at that time, Earth Schooling had just popped up, and I was able to get in with the co-op price on Earth Schooling for a lifetime membership, which is amazing when I look at what it is now. And I think I also perhaps bought Waldorf Essentials from Melissa, but at the same time too, I felt I had to do a lot of changing things around because I wasn't necessarily happy with just doing all European style stories. We were in a co-op at the time. It was really important for me to get her outside a lot. We did do a lot of going out in the woods. We were part of an ecology class. There's a local ecology organization that teaches ecology in schools and in the community, and they had homeschool classes. So we also did some of the ecology classes with them and then jumped in on any field trips that kind of popped up in our local homeschool group. So I feel at the very beginning, there was a lot of push to be able to do this better than public school. I maybe did too much because it was like, we're doing all the things. And as my middle kid became old enough to start, I tried to do kind of more family unit blocks in a way that was appropriate for him. And I did start eventually over the years start relying more on standard curriculum. I think in the beginning, especially, that was also coinciding with the beginning of like Instagram, and everybody shows you, like, oh, we're doing Waldorf school and everything is so beautiful. And we have all the clay and we have all the watercolors and the beeswax. And nobody's really talking about how they are also using all about spelling with their Waldorf curriculum. Or we're also using a formal math curriculum. It took me a second to kind of catch on to that. We did end up folding in Logic of English for reading, and we did some like Singapore math and eventually some Beast Academy and Math Mammoth. Actually, we've done a lot of different math curricula, honestly, depending on the child. So we fold in some like more traditional math to go with our traditional curricula to go with the Waldorf curriculum.
This took me a long time to catch up on too. And then I did similar to what you did because we need to have daily language arts practice, daily math practice. Right. Foreign language is important to me. So we were doing what I call Waldorf block and then Charlotte Mason lessons. And then I met Hannah, who I'm interviewing soon, and she calls that daily work. In a Waldorf school, they have their main lesson block and then they have their daily work. So they're still doing spelling, math, language arts, etc. And yeah, that took me a little while to catch on to too, but we definitely have our main lesson block and then we have our daily work, which are short Charlotte Mason style lessons, 5 to 7 minutes with some practice.
I think, that's exactly like what we ended up kind of doing. So like, for instance, we do a little bit of that Waldorf math. Like, so for instance, for second grade, we do a story about like folk tales type stories in the second grade. We do our little folktale story, do something little hands-on, but then he'd have just a worksheet of problems from Math Mammoth. I felt some of these more straightforward curricula were really good for that daily practice. My youngest child, he started entering school at the same time, Math with Confidence on the scene. And I really loved that. that curriculum for him. And that was also very easy to add in with Waldorf. Although I would say he's the least Waldorfy of them all. And at this point, he is in the 5th grade. We have basically dropped Waldorf.
Yeah.
For him. Yeah.
So tell me, what did your middle school schedule look like? And your oldest now is 17, so she's in high school.
She's doing dual enrollment. She is fairly independent from me. Unfortunately, I would say a lot of her schoolwork ends up being online. So she's doing Mr. D for math. That is a lecture that's online. There's some homework that goes with it. And then she's in charge of actually grading that herself. For science, she's doing human nutrition at the local community college. And that is a asynchronous online class. It's really involved. My husband, who teaches chemistry at our local university, he's like, this class is not a first year freshman class. That has been a challenge for her. She likes it and she's doing well. She's getting an A, but she's really dipping her toes into what a college class could look like. We're using a little bit of Students of History, which is a curriculum created by a high school teacher in the public schools. He has lectures online, he has worksheets, and then we match that with reading. We're pulling from different places, but she's fairly independent. She'll be doing her English for this year through dual enrollment also. And then for my middle schooler, he is more independent than my oldest was. For math, he's using Math Without Borders for algebra. We are doing like earth science together. For his English language arts, it's a mix of doing Brave Writer. He's doing sentence diagramming using the critical thinking companies. And also we do a little bit more writing with grammar using Evan Moore. And I never thought that I'd be somebody who's in workbooks, but they have definitely come in handy. Then we have a co-op. Our co-op has changed through the years because the kids in the co-op have gotten older. Once the pandemic hit, our co-op went from being all in-person co-op, although I was not in this co-op at that time, to being online. The way our co-op had functioned for a while was that even post-pandemic, we meet for a Zoom class on Fridays. They'd have like a rotating schedule, different people teaching. And then after lunch, we'd all meet somewhere in person for a field trip. My 8th grader, he's been talking about going to like MIT since he was in the 7th grade.
Impressive.
Yeah. So we'll see.
Good luck, Mama.
Yeah, I know. Like, okay, no pressure there, right? So for him, it's like, okay, well, if that's what you want to do, I have to be really real with him. You need to be very on top of things for everything. And then it's like, and we need to start talking about what are you doing outside of homeschool? Right. My husband's, he kind of scares me a little bit because are we going to be able to give him enough of what he needs to get to where he wants to go? I
think you can. I have full faith. I've seen what you've done. Just if you don't know already, you can do dual enrollment in a university and not just a community college, which I did not realize. There are all kinds of free classes. MIT has free college courses online. Yes. There are lots of different resources for children.
Yeah, we definitely started looking at some of those as we're trying to plan out what he's going to do for high school and thinking about getting him an opportunity to do research.
That's a great idea.
At the local university.
Make sure he does math through calculus.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I think that the curriculum that I've picked for him to do for math will set him up really well. Like my husband says, he's not super impressed with the math that most students are coming to college with at the moment. Doesn't matter where they're going to school. My daughter, she doesn't seem as burned out from school as kids going into college are.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have had the same experience. And because of that, and because our philosophy in our house, and I think most homeschoolers' house, is mastery, not how hard can we push, how fast can we go.
Right.
We have taken our dual enrollment classes slower, and he's been more serious than a lot of students in the class. He's actually doing the reading. I was surprised to find out a lot of college kids are not doing the reading. Hi friends, it's Della from The Beauty of Play again. The Beauty of Play membership subscription is now open for enrollment. I've been homeschooling for over 15 years, and my oldest is in his third year of college. In this subscription, I've essentially downloaded my brain from all those years of homeschooling and teaching math. In the past, with coaching, I could only help one person at a time, but now I can share more with more people at a lower price. I'll help you avoid burnout by finding efficiency that allows the deep connection with your children, the cozy feel of your homeschool, and the quality of education for your children. We'll go over your baseline schooling for when things are rough. We'll go over daily rituals that give you the connection with your children that sustains the more challenging portion of your homeschool. We'll go over how we learn, how to put together units or blocks, how to teach things like reading comprehension, art study, nature study, handcrafts, and science. For math, we'll look at each concept individually. We'll talk about how the concept progresses from introduction to mastery. We'll talk about what understanding needs to be in place before introducing a new concept. And of course, we'll use all the manipulatives to do this. We'll also talk about how you can play with math in a way that's physical and provides practice without doing constant worksheets every day. We'll throw in art that introduces a concept or enhances its understanding. Most importantly, I'll be there in your homeschool journey every step of the way. When you are stuck in a math concept, I'll help explain it to you. When you are unsure about mapping out an educational plan, I'll walk you through that. When you doubt and become unsure of your homeschooling, we'll identify the needs and walk together back to the path of success. I'll be there by your side every step of the way. There are 4 posts each month in the subscription, and they include text, video, audio, and or downloads. I've set up easy navigation system so that you can find what you need. I know that most homeschoolers are making some kind of a financial sacrifice. For that reason, I've kept the subscription cost low. The subscription allows me to coach a larger group at a more reasonable price. Depending on what option you choose, it's as little as $17 a month. You can find more information at thebeautyofplay.com. If you haven't already, you can sign up for the newsletter at the bottom of the page, and I'll send you some free samples. I want this to be an easy yes for you. I'll see you inside. Let's talk about math curricula. You know, I had a hard time deciding what kind of algebra that we were going to do. I feel, especially if your child is college bound, a lot of the homeschool curricula, some of the homeschool curricula, particularly for algebra, is not enough.
Right.
We used Math UC with my son, and I supplemented because it simply is not enough and leaves out quite a bit in the textbook. On the flip side, for my daughter, you're going to laugh, I picked up the art of problem solving.
Right.
Which, if anyone listening doesn't know, is very challenging. I was seeing some college algebra in there. And so I'm like, this is too much. I mean, I love math, but my children are not going into math. We've dropped that, and I'm looking for something that had enough practice, but not as much practice. I feel the art of problem solving went too fast. You didn't have enough practice for the problems that they did and were too complex. There needs to be more baby steps for most students. And the other side, there's not enough that's gone over. The art of problem solving didn't have much on the Cartesian plane and coordinates, but Math UC didn't have enough of algebraic manipulation. And I'm back to teaching, and we're using Making Math Meaningful. It's workbook for practice, which I feel is just spot on for practice. But Making Math Meaningful is a resource. It's not a curricula.
Right. For algebra, I like Math Without Borders. And it uses Prentice Hall Classics Algebra. It very much felt an algebra class kind of similar to what I took when I was in high school. I hearing feedback from my husband about how math is going
Right.
for his students. At first I was like, is that really a good thing to say? Like, it's like math when I was in school 20 years ago. If kids are coming unprepared to university to do math in a basic general chemistry class, then yeah, this is fine. I mean, I got a minor in math, right? So
Oh, I did not know that. You
yeah, I did.
minored in math? I
I
minored in
minored in math.
chemistry.
Oh,
My
really?
major is biology, specifically
Right.
marine biology, and I minored in chemistry. And I had most of my math in high school during my
Right. Yeah.
college
No,
class.
for chemistry, you have to take a lot of math. I took math through calculus in high school. And then when I got to university, the scholarship program that I was in, they required us to take calculus again, no matter what you did in the summer before college. For chemistry, at the time, we were required to take through differential equations.
Okay.
So it turns out in order to get a minor, you only need two other classes of
Because you've
math.
had so much math
So I had so
already.
much math already. I was like, okay, yeah, sure. Throw in some statistics, which is weird that it's not required, and like a geometry class, an advanced geometry class.
That is weird. It
It
definitely
is
was
weird.
required for my degree.
It was not. I mean, I do feel like yes, that definitely makes sense for biology, like especially marine biology. But it is also weird that for chemistry weren't required to take a statistics class. Yeah, so I just threw in two other classes and ended up taking that. But okay, so back with Math Without Borders is the curriculum that my middle child is using for algebra. It's independent mostly for him. He basically gives like a little lecture. My son, he takes notes during the lecture, and then it gives you a problem set to do.
Does it ever do interleaving? Does it bring those things back up and mix in a variety of problems so there's like some assessment?
There is a little bit because it's a traditional algebra textbook. There are some like at the end of every chapter is a like a word problems type section, and so some of those you'll get some things from before. Like for instance, like you're talking about the Cartesian coordinates. My son did that in chapter 7. I'm pretty sure that I've not seen him do that again. Yeah.
And how does it do with application? Because one of the things I hear a lot from a lot of adults are like, I don't know why we had algebra. We should have had personal finance. I never used algebra. And I feel like that's a false dichotomy. Yes, we need to be
Right.
teaching personal finance. But
Right.
I also think that those adults either don't realize how often they're using algebra. Any formula is algebra. And second, if you're not using algebra, then you probably weren't taught its application and you're missing out
Right.
because it makes it so easy. I had to make a 70% solution from a 90% solution for isopropyl alcohol for a project that we were doing. And I used algebra. I mean, you can get there in other ways, but algebra is so easy.
Right. Yeah. I think that this, I said the end of each chapter is word problems. And I feel here the word problems are pretty applied. Like you can see them in real life. You know, I should ask my son if he's like noticing that they're like real life problems. If somebody didn't want to use this curriculum and they wanted to see more applied problems, I believe that Math Mammoth actually has some books that are just applied math concepts.
Well, and also physics.
Right.
My son in middle school gave me a lot of resistance. When am I going to use this? This is not applicable. I don't need to learn this because I'm never going to use it.
Right.
And so for his 8th grade year, all of his math was applied physics.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, this instructor on Math Without Borders, he actually has a physics curriculum too. And I think that one though, it's for high school. For middle school science, we did a lot of kind of in a Charlotte Mason way, a lot of reading of popular science books to see how some of those things apply. There's so many great books out there, people who are like very passionate about their subject.
I want to talk about that. Let's talk about math curricula in the early years, and then let's talk about how we teach science. So tell me what you used math curricula in the early years.
For math curricula for the early years, we did for K through, I would say like maybe 4th grade. For my older two, we did a mix of Waldorf and Math Mammoth. So I would just look at what the chapter was for Math Mammoth. And then I think about like, okay, what Waldorf stories, artwork go with that. We have a story, some of the art, maybe we'd make our own manipulatives, and then we pull out the Math Mammoth book and they do the paperwork. For my youngest, we did a lot. We actually used your
Quality of numbers.
quality of numbers.
I love that block.
And so we did quality of numbers with math with confidence a little bit.
We did quality in numbers for all of her first grade year. I started it as a block. And I was like, this is so amazing. For anybody that doesn't know, quality of numbers is the opening block for a Waldorf style introduction to mathematics. It's very hands-on, lots of movement, lots of art, and it is a study of numbers. So usually in mathematics, you're taught mathematical concepts at a time. You're focusing in on multiplication or fractions. But for quality of numbers, it is the study of numbers. That block was so much fun when we started. It was just like, we're going to do it all year round.
Yeah, we definitely, I would say we use that for a good part of the year. Like I definitely pulled different activities and concepts and for the good portion of first grade.
What else did you use? Did you mostly use Math Mammoth? Was that your main curriculum?
Yeah, we mostly use Math Mammoth. My daughter, we tried Singapore Math a little bit.
How did those compare?
Singapore Math comes with a home instruction guide. It almost compares with Math with Confidence a little bit more, where it has activities that you do to a hands-on portion, and then it has a workbook that goes with it. Math Mammoth is almost written to the child, and I think for if you're not doing Waldorf with it, a lot of people would read a little bit of the instructions, and then the kids do some of the problems. Although one thing I didn't realize when we first started Math Mammoth is that the woman who wrote the curriculum suggests that you don't do all the problems. I did not catch that at first. I thought it was, this is so much. And later I was going back through the introduction, and somewhere I had missed that she said, you don't need to do all the problems.
I think most curricula will give you more than what you need, and you need to pick and choose what's applicable for your family.
Right, yeah.
Is that more workbooky or is that more hands-on lab kind of math?
I think it depends on how you use it. In the early years, it's intended to be more hands-on. But I think I want to say that there's different types of Singapore Math. Like there may be 2 or 3 different workbooks, I don't know. But the one that we got, it came with the home instructor's guide. And so the home instructor's guide, kind of similar with Math with Confidence, it teaches you how to introduce the concept to your student. It tells you bring out these manipulatives, have them move things around. Whereas I feel like Math Mammoth was mostly just workbooky. It was really great for my second child because I already felt confident with doing the hands-on things. And I felt it gave us a little bit more space for the Waldorf stuff. Whereas if you're following the Singapore, for instance, sometimes it gets too much. I'm trying to do this story and make little clay manipulatives and also do the things that this curriculum says I'm supposed to be doing and then the work. So sometimes having a more streamlined curriculum works if you feel confident in doing the other stuff yourself.
Right. We used Mequon when my son was little, and that is supposed to definitely be hands-on lab, math lab. I love Gaetano's work. He is a heavy influence in my guides, and he uses Cuisenaire rods, and they are by far my very favorite math manipulatives because they are so versatile in the math that they can exhibit, and it makes abstract things concrete. But if you're doing the Mequon workbooks, you're using those. It's so easy to fall into just doing the workbook and not the lab. And I think for beginners in the beginning, they have a very thick manual that goes over how someone used it as a lab for several years, or maybe it's kindergarten first and second. But it's really thick. It's really dense to read through. That's hard for a beginning homeschooler with a bunch of small children.
Right.
That's one of the reasons that I wrote my math guides is because I love Jamie York's Making Math Meaningful, but they're written
Mhm.
assuming that you know math, and they're written assuming that you have some kind of Waldorf teacher training. A lot of people are
Right.
having difficulty from the concepts listed in the resource book and making that happen in fruition. So I
Right.
wrote out lessons, guides,
Yes.
like this
I
is how
think
you can do this.
right. I think it's really nice for the younger years, especially. Curriculum that's written for homeschoolers by homeschoolers who are knowledgeable. Because I feel like with the Singapore math, they did have that home instruction manual, but I don't know who that was written by. I have found early on, I used a lot of information from Carrie from Parenting Passageway.
I don't know her.
Yeah, and Hannah.
With Pepper and Pine?
Yeah, and then Jean from Waldorf Inspired Homeschooling. I actually took some classes with her to talk about. She does planning classes for Waldorf,
Nice.
which is really nice. She goes over what are the concepts you're supposed to be learning. She also homeschooled her kids. I think she had 3 also through graduating. And actually met her in person. She came and did a workshop for the Waldorf homeschoolers here in our
That's
area.
awesome. What a
And
treat.
yeah, so that was really nice. She's very helpful to kind of getting that back end. It's interesting, but especially the Waldorf homeschooling, that everybody wants to do what the Waldorf schools are doing. One of the philosophies of the Waldorf school is to make a school that's like home. They're trying to imitate what you're doing, and you're trying to imitate what they're doing, and it's just like you already have it at home. One thing I really appreciate Jean saying, the very first Waldorf school, when it was created after a war. Germany was completely decimated. The people coming in, they weren't even really teachers. They just had the concepts. The playground was in the rubble. This doesn't have to be perfect. The idea is not that you're following this curriculum that was written by some person decades ago. That the idea is that you're looking at the child in front of you and the world that you're in. You're trying to offer to them
What they need.
what they need.
What they need for the time, the place, and
Right.
the development that they are at that time.
Right. Yes. It's not about like, I'm going to do exactly what they did at the first Waldorf school or with Charlotte Mason. We're going to read all these old classics that people read in the late 19th century, the early 20th century. No, we're going to look at the child in front of us, in the world around us, and try to give the education that they need for who they are and where they live now.
That's actually beautiful. Let's go back to science and talk about
Okay.
the Charlotte Mason style living books for science that you were talking about. There are so many available now.
Right. There are so many. So in the very early years, elementary school years, we started with a lot of picture books. There are so many great science focused picture books. First and second grade were a lot of being outside too, being out in nature, observing what is happening. You could really learn a lot that way. When I was in undergrad, I did a summer research experience at Clemson University. The woman who I was doing research under was a educator. Her research was in science education. She was trying to write a first year chemistry curriculum for non-science majors that was almost completely based about water, going outside, the pH of water, how does water freeze, how does water melt, that kind of stuff in my head. Like, oh, you could just learn so much science just from observing the world around you.
There's also citizen science that you can participate in. There's so many of them. The Monarch, tagging, the Audubon. We participated one that was taking counts of different tadpole species in ephemeral ponds.
Oh,
that was a lot
nice.
of fun. Yeah.
Right. We've done like the backyard bird count. We try to make use, especially in the younger years, of all the places that are around us. We're here by Niagara Falls, and there's lots of tours going on. And we have a local science museum. Our science museum has a partnership. They also have like conservation area that's somewhere else that they host tours, like walking tours. We learn so much just learning, observing the seasons, like your phenology wheel,
Right.
and see the changes of what's happening around us. And then as we got into middle school, we started reading popular science books. Storm in a Teacup for physics, right?
And
Or
Disappearing Spoon,
Disappearing
Genie
Spoons.
in a
Like,
Bottle.
yeah, what's the one that's the Neil deGrasse Tyson book? Astrophysics. We read the young people's one, the Astrophysics for Young People books.
Joy Hakeem has a wonderful series. It's at middle school.
The Story of Science. Is
Yes.
that?
And she really has a beautiful narrative style of writing. It is chock full of
Right.
information. Ironically, it covers chemistry, mathematics, physics. It covers the physical sciences. There's
Right.
nothing
And
in
not
it about the biological sciences.
right. We tried Song of the Cell.
I haven't heard of that one. Was it good?
Yeah, it was good. It was thick. It definitely for high schoolers. They don't have a young people's version of that yet. Yeah, no, but you know what's really interesting? We haven't done a lot of living science books for biology. A lot.
Young
Yeah, go ahead.
has, I don't remember the title, but I will definitely put it in the podcast notes. But it's a new book on animals and the senses. That
Okay.
is fascinating.
Okay.
It is absolutely fascinating. Definitely adult, high school level, but
Right.
a wonderful book.
The Storm in the Teacup that we read, that was written for the audience intended to be adults. The Disappearing Spoon, they have a young reader's edition. We also read one called Furry Logic. It was okay, but that one was fascinating because it was about how animals use physics.
Oh, interesting. We read another adult book that was a living book called What the Robin Knows, and it was written by a tracker, which was fascinating. He was saying what you can deduce around you by watching the birds. Also, another biological one was The Hidden Life of Trees. I will never feel the same way about plants again.
Right. My daughter read Braiding Sweetgrass, the young.
Yeah, that's an excellent
I guess
one.
that's not true that we didn't have a biological
That's
sciences.
An excellent one as well.
Right.
So, and I just want to say, this doesn't take the place of formal science education. This is in addition to.
In addition to, something that I've noticed in the homeschool community is that a lot of the moms have a subject that like their special interests.
Mm-hmm.
My friends who are very into history or political sciences, some of them don't use a formal curricula. They have NPR always playing in the background in their house. They just constantly talk history. For our middle school, I didn't use a lot of formal curricula. With the exception of the ACS, American Chemical Society's middle school chemistry.
Yes, I like them.
Love that one. We did in some ways use the living books and then go back to either like a textbook or like an online resource to read about the concept more in depth. That was like the time we start using more YouTube videos. Because for instance, like Furry Logic, the author would actually reference studies that were done in academia. And we could go look them up. And then there would be videos from those researchers or something related. And you'd be like, oh, okay, I read what this was in the book and we learned about the concept. And then there it is. Those are the people. And this is their seeing how their research is actually like set up.
We do the same thing for the biological sciences. I don't really need a textbook. I love building foundations in scientific knowledge. It is heavy for the teacher parent. Like you have to read pages and do preparation and various things. It is not easy. There is a science curricula based on that. I don't know what it is. But people will ask me, what science curricula did you use? I don't need a science curricula. I do have a couple guides. We also did the same thing for chemistry. So I'm currently working on I had you check some of the chemistry for me. And I have a botany guide and a tree guide. But yeah, we have also pulled from various sources and created our own science.
Yeah, it's like Whereas like, when I ask my friends who are authors, who are writers, like, what are you guys doing for English? They're like, I mean, we read books and my kids write, so.
Right. And I'm confident at English, but I would never rely on my own sources for English.
I'm like, no, I need something.
Exactly. I've got to have something.
For science, we do kind of, for the middle school age, we did kind of do it a little more flowy because of both my husband and I are scientists.
Right.
You know,
Same
like
here.
our house is full of science textbooks. We kind of gravitate to that naturally. You know, my kids got like science magazines. It's always funny because my husband will be explaining some concept to my children, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah," and come back to him with their knowledge, and he's, "Wait, where did you learn? Did mommy teach you that? Like, where did you learn that?" They're like, "No, I read that in a magazine."
What has been your greatest challenge in homeschooling?
I mean, honestly, I think my greatest challenge would just be confident in what I'm doing. I have a bad habit of looking what is next, what else is happening out there, just feeling with the world, what's happening out in the world now, or in this, putting the political stuff aside, like AI is coming, universities are not being funded. It's just, wait, is what am I doing for homeschooling? Like, is this going to be enough for the way that the world is changing? I would say that probably actually is my greatest challenge, is feeling confident in what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And
That's a good sign of a homeschooler. It shows their investment in their children's community and the insightfulness and reflection that you really need to have a good education. And also, I feel like it's a common universal experience.
yes, yeah. Well, I mean, it's all on us. When your child is going through school, you could say they didn't have a really good teacher that year, so they're missing out. That was me. Yeah, that was me that year. I mean, like, I try to keep in mind, like I said, because I was a military brat, I definitely had holes in my education growing up. I mean, that's just because I graduated from a school in Virginia. I never had Virginia state history because I was not in school when I did not live in that state when that happened, and not always going from different schools, they don't always line up with what they're teaching.
Right.
I do try to keep in mind, one, like, hey, you went to public schools and private schools and you had holes in your education. Like, there's no possible way you're going to graduate a kid anywhere K through 12 that's going to know all the things and be 100% ready for school. There's always going to be something that they're going to need to learn. And so I do try to keep that in mind. And then, like, my husband always tries to tell me, like, no, like, yes, they're doing fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there definitely is always going to be gaps, always.
Right.
And not that we shouldn't have some kind of standard, not that we shouldn't try to meet that
Right.
standard, but there's always going to be gaps.
Right. But it's like, I know there's going to be gaps. Yes. And like you said, that we shouldn't lower our standards because of that. But also maybe that can give me a little, like, allow me to not stress too much
It gives you a little grace.
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Right.
well, the other thing that I want people to know is that as you're going along, a lot of the times when you hit a block and you see a
Mhm.
gap, that's your opportunity to fill it. You will have
Right.
opportunity to fill a lot of gaps.
Right.
And I think
Right.
everybody comes out of their education thinking that there are gaps.
It's funny because even just for parenting, I always keep in mind we're here on our own because my family and my husband's family, they live in a different state or different country. So I do tell my children, like I tell my oldest, like, even just as a person, you're being raised mostly by two people. Like, two people can't possibly fulfill all the needs of one child. As a human species, we were designed to be raised in a much larger village. And even though they do have adults around them, can help a little bit with that, it's not the same as if we were like in that, that village,
Right.
that community, like a more community type experience. And I have to think about the same, like, with their education. There's no possible way that just me or even my husband and the little classes that we're outsourcing here and there, there's no way that even those things are going to give them every single possible thing that they could learn or need.
Right.
But hopefully they love learning, and they do, and they know how to learn. So when they see the gaps themselves, they know how to go look for resources to fill those in.
It's really important to not only teach children, but to facilitate them knowing how to teach themselves, how to learn. And hopefully, we're all raising lifelong learners.
Yes.
Okay, last question for today. What most surprised you about homeschooling?
I think maybe for me it was how much there is available in my community or region that could help aid in homeschooling. There's just so much available that you could like really never be home. And there's so many people who are willing to help. I don't know if that's partially something that is developed after the pandemic, but there's so many people who are supportive of homeschooling in a way that I wasn't really expecting, who are willing to help out and sometimes get paid. And people who are really excited to see the homeschoolers coming. They're like, you want to learn about this place that I work? You want to learn what I do? Like, sure, come on in. I would say I don't really get a lot of negative feedback. And I think maybe I thought it was going to be a little more taboo or whatever to be like, oh, we're homeschoolers. But people are just like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Good for you.
Yeah, I think in this day and age, the real challenge is not what it was in several generations back for homeschooling. Several generations back, there were only a few things available. You were criticized if you were out and about during school hours, or at least questioned, and they really clung close together. Now, the challenge is there is overwhelming amount available to homeschoolers,
Yes,
overwhelming
there is.
amount of curricula choices, resource choices, programs, classes, after school activities, or
That's
extracurricular activities. You can't do it all. You just cannot.
no.
And so you really have to
Right.
guard your time for academics,
Yes.
particularly in the middle school, high school
4
times.
years.
And you have to pick and choose. You can
Right.
possibly do things seasonally, like we'll do horseback riding in the fall when it's not really hot in the summer, and we'll do music lessons in the summer when it's really. You can pick and choose and do things seasonally, but you just simply can't do it all at the same time.
No. I think especially like you said, as the kids get older, it's like the time to really start focusing on what, at least for us, that's how we've approached it. So it's like it's time to start focusing on what you need for the next step. Like we do still want you to enjoy your education. Like we may not have time for all the extracurriculars if you're taking a really hard dual enrollment class this semester. And then also starting to think about what are ways that you can get experiences in the things that you want to be doing for college or as a career after college.
Let's talk about that for just a second. There is a great book, Jake Bowles, I believe. I think the title is College Without High School, but I could have that wrong. But it is basically talking about facilitating the same kind of theme that we did in our early years with education, but doing so in a way that preps us for college or trade or whatever your next
Right.
step is. And you're talking about experience in different fields. I want people to know what opportunities are available.
I can only really talk about what is, one is here, and two, what my kids are interested in. My oldest, she has really loved art and she loves thinking about public transportation and urban planning. So maybe the thing that makes the most sense is to do art classes outside of our homeschool, which she does. And then through that, we were able to have her join an art program where she gets to not only take classes, but they also bring in local artists to give workshops. The kids who are in that program, workshops on their art. They also have coordinated their own art show, put together a panel having artists who work in the health industry, people who do medical illustration, things like that, come in and have a panel to discuss with kids who are interested in that place where art and science meet as a career. So there's some of these opportunities that are already set out there. Also, we have organizations that do tours around the city. She's also looking at maybe volunteering to do one of these architecture history tours. For her, at her age, she's not going to be giving the tour, volunteering in some capacity. Our local university has summer camps. We've applied to those. We'll see if that comes through for the summer, where she would get to actually work with architects at the university and then also learn about architecture of the city. And then for my middle schooler, I feel because science is where my husband and I, that was our careers, we have a much better handle on that. So for my middle schooler, we know that he can do research at the local university. We just have to find a professor who does research in an area that he's interested in who would be willing to take them on. And then our local university has tons of outreach to try to get sciences and engineering out into the community. He does a robotics program that is located at the university. As we go, just being curious, like what's out there. So for my daughter, that was a little bit more out of my wheelhouse. Luckily, we have the internet, and I could just look for my city name and subjects of things that she's interested in, and kind of keeping updated on what's happening in my city. So, for instance, there's going to be an urban planning conference. Talks open up to the community. We can go there, and then we learn about what people are doing around us, what opportunities there are to volunteer, if there is some little activism that's happening related to what she wants to do, like, oh, we can work with this group, volunteer. Same like for my son, he was going to engineering. I just try to keep updated on what's going on around me, and it becomes easier to find opportunities as you start just going to things and find out who's doing what around you. And most people are really very excited to see young people interested in what they're doing. So if they can't necessarily bring your child on to what they're doing, they most likely know somebody who they could point you to. It's like, well, this person has a program that your child can start getting into, or this person might be open to having your kid come do research with them.
We did a very similar thing with my son, whose interest was photography, as you know, and we tapped in similar ways. I joined wildlife photography or nature photography groups, and I set up sessions for him to shoot with different nature photographers in our area. They were happy to have a young person that was interested in photography go with them. That opened up other opportunities. I took him to photographic workshops, and in the end, we have filmed with some amazing photographers because of that. David Moran, who has work in the Smithsonian, John Spohr, who is famous for Florida, and another one, John Moran, that did the Springs photography. He also worked with David, and even a National Geographic photographer, Joel Satori, had come down locally to our aquarium for his photo arc, and my son spent 2 days volunteering and shooting with him, which is interesting because one of the resources that I used for his photography education was from the Great Courses, and it was all Joel Satori's lecture. And when I said, he's watched every single one of your lectures, he was like, really? They're so boring. He watched all of them? I was like, over and over again, he's watched your lectures. And I think the idea is to do what you're talking about, put your foot in, join groups, look for opportunities in doing so. Photography is a really expensive hobby. The good cameras, the DSLRs, are well out of my price range. What we did to facilitate that is that our area has a large artist venue each year of arts and crafts people, like craftsmen people, and they have a children's tent available. And so he would sell his photography to pay for better photography equipment, and that's how we funded it. For my daughter, it's the same thing. When she was young, I told her she was really interested in, and I knew we had to direct that energy when one time she brought me a baby squirrel that she had climbed up into a tree to see the squirrel nest and found a baby squirrel and brought me a baby squirrel. And I was like, oh, Go put it back in the nest. And we need to do something. We need to direct this energy. And so we found a local wildlife rehabilitation center that she was 8 when that happened. That initially we went together one day a week and volunteered for an hour at that facility. The facility owner and her daughter really made a connection. And that's a beautiful thing about homeschooling, the community connections. And now she volunteers 3 hours, 2 days a week, and it's a drop-off pickup situation. And she has learned so much from that experience.
Nice. Yeah.
He did cover a lot, but it was really nice.
Yes. I agree.
Well, so much for joining me today, Tomika. I really enjoyed our conversation.
I enjoyed it too.
Is there any place that you are online that people can find you?
Yeah, people can find me on Instagram at Tomika RCV. And just know that I'm not there very often, trying to break up with Meta. But I do try to check in every now and again.
Okay. I'll put those in the podcast show notes. And thank you.
Okay. Nice. Thank you.